Today, we celebrate 20 years of the African Union Convention on Prevention and Combating Corruption. So we have to see where we stand. I will not repeat what speakers before me have said. We all know corruption is endemic around the world. It robs not only Kenya, but all countries of important benefits, and it forces people to engage to survive. I was so sad when I saw our statistics of this morning. This is survival, and at one point or another, we are forced to engage in things that we are not wanting to engage in because the systems are set up in a way that we cannot avoid it. And many times corruption is not only a bribe that is offered, but is also a threat. And there it becomes dangerous, and it becomes a challenge to the lives, not only livelihoods. So it's a dragon that we have to slay globally. What was not said in my introduction is that in my previous life, in my previous job in Brussels, I was also in charge of the fight against corruption of the EU worldwide. And I learned a couple of lessons there, very hard lessons. And what we have tried to do is to have an approach that is robust enough of the EU to adapt to the context locally, but also to have a global impact. This is why we formed these sort of networks. So also civil society around the world can connect, share best practices, and help each other to slay the dragon. So I can tell you that the European Union is deeply committed to the fight against corruption. And this is not only a fight outside the EU's borders. This is a fight that we're also fighting within the EU. It is very important to say that because, as I said, corruption is all over. The question is, what is the percentage that is tolerable in a society and where it becomes completely unsustainable and destroys a country? So we also know that the economic impact of corruption is tremendous. We did some studies in the EU. So globally, the negative economic impact is estimated to equal 9 times of official global development assistance. Think about that. 9 times global development assistance. That means if we slay the dragon of corruption, there's no need of any country or any organization to give development assistance because every country would be able to provide amply for its citizens. So this is what we have to keep in mind when we're looking at the fight against corruption, because this is the big price that is hanging there for us. And this is what we're aspiring to do. And we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated corruption around the world because big sums were dispersed very quickly. Medical supplies were being dispersed, and a lot has happened that was not accounted for globally. So the EU and its institutions, we have just recently adopted, on the 4th of May, new conclusions reaffirming our commitment to incorporate a very strong anti-corruption perspective in all our international development efforts, in all the programs that we're doing worldwide. And we are adopting a whole-of-government approach in combating corruption, whenever and wherever it occurs. So, key of the EU's global approach is, of course, our Human Rights and Democracy Action Plan. Corruption cannot be seen outside of human rights. So, two examples of the EU's support for rights holders. It's this here, SANCUS, strengthening accountability networks among civil society with Transparency International. We have thought up that program specifically to empower civil society across country boundaries. It empowers civil society in 26 countries, including Kenya. And you have to make sure that you use and you leverage your power by uniting and shaming across borders. For duty bearers, we are developing a program with the Open Government Partnership. So this is implementing action plans on transparency and accountability with pilot countries. Kenya is one of them. 34 of our EU delegations in Africa have anti-corruption activities prioritized in their cooperation. And this includes, of course, support to democracy, rule of law, and public financial management. In line with our commitment to a holistic approach, we are developing these new operational guidance on anti-corruption to make us more efficient in our efforts to support national efforts. I will not repeat what has been said, but corruption is one of the costliest non-tariff barriers to global trade, especially for low and lower middle income countries, and one of the main obstacles to the creation of favorable business and investment environment. This, of course, is very pertinent also to Kenya. So as we zoom in on Kenya, it's true, Kenya took strong international commitments to address corruption. But despite all commitments and efforts, we very much are aware that corruption is one of the most important challenges Kenya is facing nowadays. And if we tackled corruption in Kenya, the sky would be the limit. I'm sure that Kenya would skyrocket in its development. So we really have to join forces on this, and everybody has to be aware of the issue. And as my previous speaker, my friend Pirka, said, the government made important commitments, but we all know that in a society where corruption affects all levels, action has to be taken at all levels. And of course, if the leaders are seen as engaging, everybody else thinks, for me, it's also okay. So this is one of the big obstacles. And I know, I talked to many Kenyans since I arrived, that in Kenya it was also seen during the colonial period that it was very much okay, actually good, to cheat the British colonizers. Yes, it was maybe a good thing, but these days are over and old habits may die hard. but they have to die in order to have something new being born. The government just now announced a new package of legislation and amendments to strengthen its anti-money laundering framework. That was last Friday. Notably on enhanced customer due diligence, strengthened reporting obligations, expanded scope and coverage for AML/CFT legislation, and increased penalties and deterrence. But we all know laws are there, but they are serving nothing if they're not being properly implemented. And for proper implementation, we need not only first Parliament's endorsement, and we all know there are vested interests in Parliament as well, but we need an implementation throughout society. So I will not say much more, but I think for us, what is most important is strengthening the good governance framework in Kenya. We have embarked on the largest justice sector reform program in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. The EU has invested 70 million euros in justice sector reform, and we feel that we have made lots of progress in the last years. I'm not saying that there are no more challenges in the justice sector, but access to justice without having to bribe is one of the main achievements that we have to obtain here in Kenya. Let me come to the end. We also think that with the devolution process, we have to be careful, because if there is corruption at central levels, we don't want to export corruption to the county levels. We have to make sure that as government services are devolved, we also have very strong mechanisms at the county levels to hold county governments accountable for their action or non-action. I was talking about the EU's anti-corruption directive. So this will set the tone for EU's fight against corruption. We have a network, EU network against corruption, and we have very strong anti-corruption policies and legislations in our member states. Pirkka was also alluding to that. But we also have transnational criminal networks that are feeding on corruption activities and networks and finance their other criminal activities like that. So this is something that calls for transnational action of us, all of our actors, government actors, civil society, and actually every citizen. We need a global response. The EU will always stand tall and strong for those who are engaged in the fight against corruption. Why? Because we think that corruption is the strongest impediment to sustainable development in any country. Asanteni sana.